Hope, as you have been conditioned to understand it, is a profound liability. It is the very thing that will break you when the world finally strips away your comfortable illusions. We are taught from childhood that relentless positivity is the ultimate armor against adversity, that a sunny disposition can magically alter the fabric of a cruel universe. But what if the optimists are always the first to perish? What if your survival depends not on a cheerful outlook, but on a ruthless, uncompromising confrontation with the abyss? Consider the sky over Vietnam in September 1965. Admiral James Stockdale ejects from his crippled A-4 Skyhawk, watching his aircraft disintegrate into the jungle below, knowing instantly that his life as a free man has violently ended. He is descending directly into the Hanoi Hilton, destined to become a prisoner of war, who will face over 7 years of unimaginable captivity. He does not know when or if he will ever see his family again. He is entering a shadow realm where standard human coping mechanisms are systematically dismantled through isolation, torture, and profound deprivation. The physical agony of his arrival was immediate, but the psychological warfare proved to be the true crucible. The captors did not merely want to inflict pain, they wanted to break the mind, to extract false confessions, to turn proud, disciplined men into hollow instruments of foreign propaganda. Stockdale, as the highest-ranking naval officer in the camp, bore the heaviest and most dangerous burden. He was the prime target for their most vicious efforts, yet he quickly recognized that his primary battle was not against the guards, but against the fragile, desperate architecture of his own mind. Here, in the suffocating dark of a concrete cell, he leaned heavily on Stoicism, the ancient Greek philosophy that demands the rigid, uncompromising separation of what we can control from what we cannot. This is a philosophy not of emotionless void, but of highly disciplined perception. He remembered the teachings of Epictetus, an ancient slave-turned-philosopher, whose lessons were brutally stark. You cannot control the chains on your ankles, the beatings in the interrogation room, or the agonizing passage of time, but you possess absolute, untouchable sovereignty over your own moral purpose and your response to the immediate reality. The application of this ancient wisdom was an agonizing daily practice. It required a conscious, relentless choice to strip away all comforting delusions and face the stark terror of the present. Stockdale noticed a grim, recurring pattern among his fellow prisoners as the months bled into years. It was not the physically weakest who perished first, nor was it the most hardened cynics. It was the eternal optimists. These were the men who believed they would be out by Christmas, then by Easter, then by Thanksgiving. When those arbitrary dates came and went, the crushing weight of the disappointment destroyed their spirits. They died of a broken heart. Decades later, the researcher Jim Collins would immortalize this psychological dynamic as the Stockdale Paradox. The concept serves as a masterclass in holding two intensely contradictory forces in your mind simultaneously without losing your sanity. It is the demanding discipline of confronting the most brutal facts of your current reality, whatever they might be, while simultaneously maintaining unwavering faith that you will prevail in the end. It is a razor-thin tightrope walked over a bottomless chasm of despair, requiring a mind forged in iron. This paradox is a violent rejection of modern toxic positivity, which demands you ignore the bleeding wound and smile at the sun. The paradox demands you stare directly into the wound, acknowledge the severe infection, accept the high probability of amputation, and yet harbor a cold, untouchable certainty that you will survive the surgery. It requires you to harness cognitive dissonance, the mental discomfort of holding two conflicting beliefs, and transform it from a psychological stressor into a potent weapon of endurance. Look closely at the architecture of your own life. How often do you mask a deteriorating situation with a fragile veneer of baseless hope? You tell yourself the failing business will magically turn around next quarter, or that a toxic relationship will fix itself if you just wait a little longer. You play the tragic role of the optimist in the POW camp, setting artificial deadlines for your own salvation. And every single time reality fails to meet your fabricated timeline, a vital piece of your inner resolve shatters. True mental resilience is not about bouncing back to a state of naive comfort. It is about moving forward through the fire with open, unblinking eyes. Stockdale did not survive by telling his men that rescue was imminent or that their suffering was almost over. He survived by accepting that they might be trapped in hell for a decade and then asking a much harder question about how to live with honor today. He fundamentally redefined success. Success was no longer about escaping the prison. It was about mastering the self within the prison. This profound shift in perspective allowed him to orchestrate a highly effective underground resistance. He established a covert communication system using complex tap codes, creating a unified, defiant culture among the deeply isolated men. He dictated strict rules for enduring torture, giving his men explicit permission to break, to confess under extreme duress, but demanding they bounce back and fight again the next day. He systematically removed the destructive shame of human frailty and replaced it with a highly functional system of collective resilience. The rhythmic tap code echoed through the damp concrete walls, becoming a constant heartbeat of defiance. It was a vital lifeline that proved they were still human, still deeply connected, and still actively resisting their captors. He took the brutal reality of solitary confinement and weaponized it, turning the enforced silence into a vast canvas for unconventional leadership. The captors could chain their broken bodies to the floor, but Stockdale ensured they could never isolate their minds. He built an invisible, impenetrable fortress of solidarity right under the noses of his tormentors. The ultimate consequence of this brutal honesty was collective survival. By stripping away the false comfort of arbitrary timelines and baseless optimism, the men conserved their precious psychological energy. They stopped riding the exhausting emotional roller coaster of anticipation and crushing disappointment. They settled into the grim, enduring task of living entirely in the present moment, however horrific that moment happened to be. They learned to extract profound meaning and purpose from the suffering itself. You must cultivate this exact same ruthless objectivity in your own pursuits. When you face a severe crisis, your first biological instinct is to seek immediate reassurance. You want someone to pat your shoulder and tell you it will all be okay. The renegade noble violently rejects this pacifier. You must become your own harshest, most unforgiving auditor. Audit your reality. Strip away the comforting lies, the convenient excuses, the unwarranted optimism. Look directly at the wreckage of your failure, your mounting debt, your broken ambitions, and acknowledge the full, terrifying scope of the damage. This is the practical essence of shadow work. The psychological practice of exploring the dark, hidden, and often painful aspects of your own psyche and reality that you normally repress or deny. You cannot heal a wound that you refuse to acknowledge exists. By shining a harsh, unforgiving light on the brutal facts of your life, you rob them of their subconscious power over you. You transform the unknown, paralyzing terror into a known, quantifiable variable, and known variables can be managed, fought, and eventually overcome. It is a terrifying threshold to cross for the uninitiated. Admitting the true depth of your predicament often feels like surrendering to it, like admitting total defeat. But it is the exact opposite. Absolute acceptance of reality is the first, non-negotiable prerequisite of personal power. As long as you are fighting the reality of your situation, you are wasting vital energy that should be used to change it. Stockdale fully accepted that he was a prisoner. He never once accepted that he was defeated. This powerful duality is the hallmark of the master. Unwavering faith is not a passive, whimsical wish directed at the universe, hoping for a favorable outcome. It is an active, aggressive, and deeply rooted stance. It is the quiet, unbreakable vow that no matter how long the night lasts, you will be standing when the dawn finally breaks. It is a faith rooted not in favorable external circumstances, but in your own internal, tested capacity to endure. You must become the immovable anchor in your own violent storm. The echoes of that stoic resolve follow us into the modern era, directly challenging our soft dependencies and our aversion to suffering. We live in an age of instant gratification, where discomfort is treated as a dangerous anomaly to be medicated, distracted from, or entirely escaped. But the human spirit is only truly forged in the intense crucible of adversity. When you adopt this mindset, you actively immunize yourself against the fragility of the modern world. You become anti-fragile, growing sharper and stronger through the very chaos that breaks ordinary people. For over 7 agonizing years, the Admiral lived this demanding paradox every single day. He endured heavy leg irons, prolonged solitary confinement, and repeated, bone-breaking physical torment. Yet he emerged from the Hanoi Hilton not as a broken shell of a man, but as a defining historical figure of moral courage and leadership. His eventual return was not a triumph of blind hope, but a testament to the sheer grinding power of highly disciplined thought. He had faced the absolute worst of human nature and conquered it by entirely mastering his own. The men who followed his unconventional lead, who embraced the rhythmic tap codes and the brutal, unvarnished acceptance of their grim fate, found a strange, empowering liberation. They were no longer helpless victims waiting for a political savior to intervene. They were active soldiers fighting a new, invisible kind of war, a relentless war of attrition fought entirely within the mind. The paradox allowed them to reclaim their personal agency in an environment mathematically designed to strip them of all control. They became absolute masters of their own micro-universe. How will you apply this profound discipline to your own modern captivity? You may not be locked in a physical concrete cell, but you are almost certainly trapped by something, a stagnant, soul-crushing career, a destructive daily habit, or a heavy societal expectation that suffocates your true potential. The walls of your prison are built entirely from your own avoidance and denial. The moment you stop looking for an easy, painless exit and start critically examining the locks, the dynamic fundamentally shifts. You stop being a passive captive and start being a calculated escape artist. As the philosopher Seneca once observed, a gem cannot be polished without friction, nor a man perfected without trials. The adversity you face today is not a random cosmic punishment. It is the raw, necessary material of your own forging. The brutal facts of your life are the heavy hammer. Your unwavering faith is the solid anvil. Between these two immense forces, your character is shaped into something unbreakable. To reject the friction of reality is to reject your own necessary evolution. Ultimate mastery over your destiny requires you to hold the intense tension of the paradox every single day of your life. You must look at the world with cold, calculating eyes, accurately assessing the imminent threats, the inevitable betrayals, and the seemingly insurmountable odds without ever flinching. And simultaneously, you must fiercely tend to the quiet, burning fire in your chest that whispers of your inevitable triumph. You do not survive by ignoring the encroaching dark. You survive by becoming the blinding light that cuts straight through it. The enduring legacy of James Stockdale is a masterful blueprint for the renegade spirit. It is a demanding, uncompromising path that asks absolutely everything of you and promises nothing in return but the fierce preservation of your own soul. When you courageously confront the brutal reality of your existence while simultaneously maintaining that fierce, unwavering faith, you transcend the mundane circumstances of your suffering. You do not just endure the captivity of this life, you conquer it entirely.